And in this place where God meets Jacob, Jacob is reminded that his descendants, who are going to be like the sand of the earth, have the ability to bless the whole world if they remember that they can go up and grab heaven and bring it back down. To me, I love that picture, right?
Yeah.
That this is a reminder to us that as members of the faithful, if we were to genuinely live in that space, we have the opportunity to go up, grab some heaven, and bring it back down.
Hello, and welcome to the Ancient Jesus Future Faith podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Tana Sheaver, and I am here with Sarah Minardi.
Hello.
And Don Sheaver.
Hey.
I don't think I said my other co-host, but I think you get it. Anyway, today we're going to be taking a second look at Jacob. A few podcast episodes back, we talked about Jacob. We talked about how Esau sold his birthright to Jacob, and then Jacob stole Esau's blessing. So kind of two ways that Esau was either tricked or didn't really care about his birthright, depending on how you wanted to look at it. And so we mostly talked about the brothers. And now we're moving on to the next part in Jacob's journey, where Jacob is traveling. And we're going to talk a little bit about Genesis 28, starting in verse 10. And this is where Jacob left Beersheba and went towards Haran. I don't know if I'm pronouncing those things correctly. He camps for the night. And he dreams about the ladder we call Jacob's ladder, with angels of God ascending and descending it. And then when he rises in the morning, he takes the stone that he's using for a pillow, which sounds super comfortable. And
I heard that's how my pillow got their start.
Okay. So he took the stone that he had used as a pillow and set it up as a pillar, and then he named the place Bethel, and he made a vow to God. That's my very brief summary of that passage. So go. No,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Well, actually, yeah, I think another bridge point to bring in of getting to this point is Rebekah saying, so basically in 27, Esau is so angry at Jacob because of the blessing that he says the days of my mourning for my father are approaching, then I will kill my brother Jacob. And Rebekah hears about this, and she tells Jacob, listen, your brother Esau is consoling himself by planning to kill you. So now, my son, listen to me, flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran. So basically just a little bit of the why is he traveling?
Right.
Backstory.
Yeah.
That she's like, go to Laban until his anger subsides. And then Isaac blesses Jacob, and then Jacob heads away so his brother doesn't kill him.
I just think it's kind that Esau decides to wait until after Dad's dead.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm not going to kill my brother until after Dad kicks it, and then we'll do something about this.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, that's something that struck me when you were like, oh, and, you know, Esau wanted to kill Jacob, and so Rebekah told him that, you know, and I'm just like, I can't imagine that as like, we just read these Bible stories and don't always think about,
Yeah.
you know, the heaviness of it. I can't imagine being like, son, my other son wants to kill you.
Well, this is progress. I mean, Cain didn't warn Abel, so
That's
mean,
fair.
at least now Jacob has a heads up.
Esau wants to
Yeah.
give him a sporting chance.
Yeah, and then even like Rebekah goes to Isaac and blames it on the Hittite women, which are who Esau married, right? Like she's basically blaming it on Esau's wives and the fact that he didn't marry the right people, instead of like, it's like just more deception going on in the story. Like,
Yeah.
There's a bit of deflection.
yeah.
Yeah, what would the Hittite women have to do with that?
Just that it was more so about the fact that, you know, Esau did not marry within the family, so to speak.
Okay.
You know, I would like to imagine we've gotten away from that in our culture today. But we all know that that's not our reality in a lot of spaces. And so, but, you know, maybe more along racial lines we have the most obvious complications. But, oftentimes a German marries a German, or an Irish person marries an Irish person. That's not necessarily as big of a thing anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that would have been very much the same situation then, especially since, particularly in ancient times, the gods were connected to the people.
Oh,
so
right.
like ethnicity, if you met someone based on their ethnicity, you would know who the gods were that they worshipped. And so this also becomes important for blessings, etc. Is, did you marry someone that shares the same ethnic god that you have?
Yeah, I was thinking if it was something like that, because she says, I'm sick of my life because of these Hittite women, and like just that if they had different traditions
So
or
dramatic.
I know.
Yeah.
So I was thinking.
But if they like interrupted like her regular traditions, be it spiritual or community based about like,
Yeah.
then that would be annoying. So
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably something to that. This again just goes to how much can we read historicity into this. But even if we don't hold this as a historical setting, or if we do, still there would be absolute complications by introducing other gods into your household.
yeah.
You just think about something within modern times of if a Muslim and a Christian were to marry, the complications that creates, especially in the parents of the children that get married, or the grandparents who have maybe always married within their religious structures, that, it would absolutely cause disruption.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, maybe she really wasn't even sick of them, because this is just what she tells Jacob. I mean, this is what she tells Isaac. This is the deception she decides to tell Isaac, to convince Isaac to let Jacob go.
Right.
So really, maybe she's playing on like what she thinks Isaac values and why Isaac would let Jacob go.
Yeah, I mean, she's the puppet master in,
Yeah.
in all this. Yeah.
It's just like, man, she's just like constantly deceiving her husband throughout this marriage.
Because at first I'm like reading it like, she said it, she probably meant it. I'm like, wait a minute, no, like, yeah,
Yeah. And I think we can...
she has a goal in mind.
She does. And I think we run the risk of viewing Rebekah only as deceptive. And we get into that same danger with Laban, and we get into that danger with Jacob. And I think we need to be cautious, because I think this is a method of storytelling that is trying to... I mean, if it gave us all the details... Like, I don't know how many people sat through the full reading of the text that we did a couple weeks ago, which was only like 26 verses or something like that. But that's a long time for us in Christendom in the West to sit through listening to a passage. Imagine if it went into all the breadth and details of all the thoughts and processes that went on behind the scenes to get Rebekah to this place. So a lot of this stuff is just shortcuts for storytelling purposes, would be my guess. And instead, what it comes across to us is, as opposed to it being Rebekah doing everything in her power to ensure that the promises of God come to fruition, we read this as deception. And obviously, there is deception involved. But what is the motivation behind it? Is it because Rebekah is wicked? Or is it because Rebekah does not trust that Isaac, in Isaac's current state, would be capable of ensuring that this goes the way that God had intended it to go?
Well, and doesn't in the text, doesn't it only ever show God talking to Rebekah, not God talking to Isaac?
Correct.
So that's interesting too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just think that one of the things that I think is powerful about Israel's idea of a God is the absolute participation, not the pawns, of humans to ensure what God wants to happen happens, right? That it's something unique to Israel at this point, that they imagine that God shares God's ideas with the people, and then the people bring it to fruition. And sometimes the people do it wrong. and sometimes the people do it right. And it seems to be that when they do it right, it's done justly. This one really skirts the lines of just and unjust in the way that it's being done. So I think that this is why we also see Jacob has to suffer in this next section, that there is some cost to the way that Rebekah and Jacob go about doing this that we're going to see in the next section.
All right. Well, so any thoughts on this part where Jacob is at what he eventually names Bethel? About the ladder.
There's entire books written about this section, like books upon books upon books upon books.
Yeah. I mean, when you think of Jacob's ladder, what first pops into your head?
I think this is, to me, the space at which heaven and earth kiss is like some of the ways that this has been talked about throughout Jewish history. This is the space where heaven and earth touch, that they come in contact, that they meet. And I think that that's a really powerful image. I believe some, if not most, connect this to be ultimately where the temple ends up being built. Or at least becomes one of the first places of the imagination for where the temple is, because it's where heaven and earth touch.
Yeah, because he does come back to Bethel, right? Chapters down the road. Chapter 35, God said to Jacob, "Get up, go to Bethel and settle there. Build an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." And that's chapter 35, so that's past the Laban time and coming back to meet with, to reconnect with his brother Esau. So,
What do you guys think about Jacob's statement that he names it because God was there and he did not know that God was there, right? Like this idea that, like, I didn't know you were in this place too.
yeah.
Right? That there seems to be a surprise to Jacob that God is present even in the midst of the wilderness, even outside of the space that he grew up.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it just points to a different kind of mindset that, like, and I don't know what his mindset would have been, but to be surprised that God could appear in the middle of nowhere. Like, would he have thought that God was just limited to a certain spot or space, or?
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of traditions at that time, right? You had the God of the sun. In fact, most of the actual elements, sun, moon, earth, they themselves were often viewed as being divine, right? That the earth was a divine being, the moon was a divine being, the sun was, the stars in the sky, whatever. And so, you had the God of the Nile, you had the God, like, very much gods were geographically, they were geocached in some way, right? That they had some geofencing around them that kept them in their space. So I think that there is some of this that is fascinating because we start to see relatively early on in Israel's story that God is not bound to specific spaces. And this is one of the moments that we kind of see that realization happening.
Well, and part of the blessing that God says to Jacob in this spot is, know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go. Also says he'll bring him back to that land. So there you go. But
yeah, do you think Jacob just kind of envisioned this as like an errand? Like, I'm just going to get a wife, hanging out, like
off the store to the store to pick up a wife.
But eventually the ultimate goal is just to get back, and like, so maybe that's like, get back to where God is, get back to where I'm supposed to be, and this is just like a side quest.
This is the beginning of mansplaining, actually, because he's going to meet a wife at the well, actually. Sorry. Yeah, I think that there is some interesting things here about what is in Jacob's mind. What does Jacob imagine is going on? How long does he think the bloodlust is going to last in Esau's mind? Esau seems easily distracted early on. But also to be a hunter and to be gone for days, like I think, Sarah, you had mentioned, we don't know how long he was out on this hunt.
Yeah.
But also then that also shows determination, right? If he was a good hunter, it meant that he was willing to stalk his prey for a long time. And so some of the terminology of Esau being a hunter could also play into some of the terror that it seems that Jacob has regarding his brother, that his brother will not stop. He will face whatever elements necessary in order to get the prey.
Yeah.
So I think there could be some deep dread that Grandpa Abraham felt when God asked him to go through the blood path. I think Jacob might be feeling similar.
Yeah.
So a question I have is, so God made a promise to Abraham that, all of Abraham's descendants, right? Like, and then in this blessing, God says to Jacob, the land on which you lie, I will give to you and your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and the south, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and your offspring. So I guess my question is, like, I would assume, the family knows that Abraham was blessed in that way. Like what, I guess it's like, what's the necessity in repeating it? Is there anything significant about that in repeating it? Or is it just like confirming, like, yeah.
Well, think about everything that just transpired. Don't you imagine that if you were fleeing through the wilderness from your murderous brother after you just stole everything from him, that maybe you'd be like, did we mess up?
Right.
I mean, just anyone going through to kind of bring in like deconstruction of like different pieces of their faith, whether it be eternal damnation or it be LGBTQ inclusion or whatever, that when you're going through deconstruction, you're wrestling with these big things. There will come times after you've wrestled with them that it creeps up on you and you're like, what if I'm wrong?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I think that there might be some of that potential here, that this whole moment that's taking place at Bethel is really more so about the fact that God letting Jacob know that Jacob has remained within the parameters, so to speak, to maintain the promise.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't think about the fact that Esau was the firstborn, so technically it should be through Esau's.
Yeah, this might be the first confirmation Jacob gets that everything they had done.
Right. Because God spoke all that to Rebekah, though, right? Like, was like, Jacob is the person. Like, that's the...
Yeah, but mom seems to be intimidating as hell. And so you might not debate with mom whether or not she actually heard God talk.
Are you pulling the God card again, Mom? Yeah. Okay. So now now that I think about that, I can see how this would be like a reassurance.
I mean, I think that's at least plausible.
Yeah.
And do either of you know, like, what is the significance of the ladder?
Yeah, I think it's really, I mean, that's a big question. But I think I was just going to say, it's interesting that it's set on the ground with its top reaching heaven, and God's angels are going up and down, like the fact that up is the first word. That the angels weren't going down and then up. So I think that's very, like, does that mean that, like, angels are walking the earth? Is that, like, significant in some way, that, like, that the angels are going up and then down?
I mean, Sarah, you're touching on what every rabbi throughout history has debated about this scene. Like, why not say the angels came down and then went back up? Why say up first?
Yeah.
So yeah, that is the core of this debate, at least in the imagination of rabbinic tradition.
Well, it was night, right? So, like, the day shift was done, and so the angels were going.
Yeah, but it's kind of, I mean, I think maybe a beautiful way to imagine around this is that, could it possibly have been even more consolation to Jacob? Like, these angels were with me, and now they have to go up and then come down.
That's
like, these angels were walking with me, and So they were already here, and now they're going up and down.
Yeah, it doesn't have the same ring as Stairway to Heaven, does it?
Ladder to heaven.
Well, my translation actually does use stairway. But I also think
my
it's
translation. Fine.
not the translation I did, but the one I'm reading. But I also think, what about the fact that he's dreaming? Is this the first time in the text that God comes to somebody in a dream? Because
Abraham is dreaming when he sees the pot. And
oh yes,
Yeah. The covenant.
Yeah.
with the blood path. Yeah.
So it's not the first time, but
Yeah, it doesn't begin as a dream
yeah.
for Abraham. Yeah, I think that it's, to me, what I think is one of the things that often comes out of this is with the ascending and descending, is that the earth and heaven are in partnership in such a way. And I don't want to think about this in terms of heaven as a destination. I want to think about this in terms of heaven as in the space in which God holds rule in a manner that is more pure, right? On earth, there is conflict. Yes, I know that we have these weird traditions about the Satan fighting and getting kicked out and falling. That story in the prophets is about a Babylonian king, not about the Satan. But there's a part of this that is a reminder that those of us here, if in the place of God, if in the presence of God, if in that space in which God dwells, we can ascend, and that it's connected. And I think I'm having a little bit of trouble articulating the heart of that. Mm-hmm. We have the ability to bring heaven to earth as humans, as people, as ordinary, broken, and I don't mean broken in like the original sin kind of broken, just the traumas that we've experienced in life and the shortcomings that we have as just being people in relationship. We still have the ability to bring heaven back down to earth. We still have access to that way of living, that if we do love our neighbor as ourselves, if we do take care of the marginalized, if we do fight for justice, that we have the ability to ascend, to grab a portion of heaven, so to speak, and bring it back down. And to me, I find that to be one of the more beautiful interpretations of that. And I think some of that is, what's his name? Kushner. Lawrence Kushner, I think, kind of alludes to this idea of the angels, the messengers, because that's all that means is messenger, right? And I think this is important for us when we talk about angels in the text, is we often only think of them as metaphysical beings.
Right, yeah.
When really the term really just means a messenger. It's where we get the word evangelical. Evangelion is what becomes angel, but it really just means a messenger, right? The person who shares the messages of God. That would be an evangelical. Well, that's what an evangelical is supposed to be.
Right.
So in this moment, these messengers could actually just be humans. And in this place where God meets Jacob, Jacob is reminded that his descendants, who are going to be like the sand of the earth, have the ability to bless the whole world if they remember that they can go up and grab heaven and bring it back down. To me, I love that picture, right?
Yeah.
That this is a reminder to us that as members of the faithful, if we were to genuinely live in that space, we have the opportunity to go up, grab some heaven, and bring it back down.
Yeah.
And I realize heaven creates some triggers and some problems for people from trauma and stuff, but I think the concept of that is really beautiful.
Yeah, and it just makes me think how different that is from the Tower of Babel. Because the Tower of Babel, they just wanted to get up to heaven.
Yeah. And some argue to conquer heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not the idea of bringing it back down to earth or really no indication of anything noble about that, but just like
make a name for themselves.
Yeah.
I love that as a
contrast.
A contrast. Yeah. Thank you for that.
A tower versus a ladder or a staircase.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even just that structure indicates the kind of purpose there. And I love this imagery about, we've talked about this before, about like bringing heaven to earth. Mm-hmm. And I know I've been on about this for weeks now, but it just reminds me of being a mobile sanctuary, one of our previous episodes.
Yeah.
And that's like where my head has been for the last couple of weeks, is this idea of like, how do we bring heaven to earth? And like, wouldn't it be amazing if that was all of our objectives? Because I feel like a lot of times heaven is like the prize.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, and so there's all these things we have to do on earth, including condemning people for some reason. And then, you know, you do all these things right, and then you get to heaven, and it's almost like the earth part is disposable.
Yeah.
And so I love that idea of what you were saying with the ascending and the descending, of like that connection now, instead of it just being like something that happens later.
Yeah. And the idea of heaven being like the love of God and the values of God, bringing those ideas to life on earth.
And that if it is indeed plausible that the messengers are humans,
Mm-hmm.
it's still our responsibility.
Yeah.
God's not doing it. God has created access points.
Yeah. Because this is a dream. Mm-hmm. So having a dream of people going up and down a ladder, I mean, it's already a dream. It's already meant to be weird. Like,
yeah, I've had some
Especially if you
dreams.
think about the depictions of like there where there's the description of the angel with all the eyes and everything, and I'm just picturing like a big feathered thing with all these eyes just like going up and down the staircase.
Thank you. You've ruined this for me now.
Sorry.
I was just worried that they didn't wear underwear back then and wore robes and were going up and down ladders. Now I have to think about eyes and feathers.
Anyway. Okay. Well, that was... I really enjoyed that explanation, Don. Thank you. So...
And all this happens before Jacob wrestles with God, right?
yeah.
Oh, right.
Which then... Sarah, you always use this properly, and I'm always so impressed with it. It begs the question,
Oh.
right? But finish that for me, because I always do it wrong.
Oh.
So what would be the question that it begs of?
It begs the question of like, how is this experience of Jacob with God before everything he experiences with Laban different from when he's leaving Laban, returning to meet his brother? Like, what has changed at that moment? You know, like here he's leaving his home, leaving mom and dad and going. Then he's going to be leaving his father-in-law and coming, and he doesn't know what's happened. So what has changed that we have a wrestling as opposed to a ladder?
Thank you. I'm serious. Throughout my life, people say it begs the question and they use it wrong. It's kind of like using the word ironic incorrectly. Mm-hmm. And I'm always terrified I'm going to do it wrong. But Sarah does it right every time with begs the question. So
Yeah.
thank you.
So I guess we should talk about the middle before we jump to that, though, right?
Yes. Don't jump off the ladder yet.
So Jacob seems really excited. What an awesome place this is, in my translation. This is none other than the house of God, the gate of heaven. But yeah, so then at the end, he makes a vow, if God will be with me and watch over me on this journey, if he provides with me food and clothing to wear, if I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God. A stone I'll set up as a marker will be God's house. I'll give to you 1/10 of all that you would give me. And I just, it seems like Jacob's bargaining, but when I read that, I just wanted to point out that, like, I feel like more like he's just like confirming, like he's kind of like, he's like, I'm in this,
Yeah.
Instead of, like, I think an initial reading could be like, oh, now he's just like making a bargain with God. But these are things, kind of like what God has already promised to him.
Yeah.
So I see it more as just like, okay, I'm in.
Yeah, I think there's two ways of reading this. Obviously, way more than that, but the two main ways would be either Jacob, is threatening God to say, you got to bring me back here. And if you don't, then I'm not doing all this. Right. And so there's like almost like a bargaining piece of like, bring me back and then you get your 10%. Right. Or you can read it similar to, I think about like Jonathan and his armor bearer when the Philistines are off outside of Israel and there's one sword amongst all the Israelites. And Jonathan says to his armor bearer, let's go over there and maybe God will go with us.
Right.
And I think that this is more so similar to that's the way I read it, which is if I survive all this, know that I will be faithful. Not as if you protect me, so I survive all this, then I'll pay you off. No, instead it's that what Jacob sees in front of him as such a heavy journey that he's about to go on, as he's running from Esau, as he's going into the unknown of his his uncle's land, or future father-in-law. That gets really confusing there, but goes into his uncle's land with not knowing what the outcome is going to be. He basically, I read it more so as the second, which is, if I make it through all this, I will be faithful. I will continue my faithfulness, or I will do these things.
Okay, so any other thoughts on this passage before maybe we talk about more of Jacob's story?
Yeah, I think we're ready to go on.
Okay, so the Jacob story continues for many, many chapters, including meeting Rachel.
Yeah, we'll sit through 3.5 hours of 1/3 of Lord of the Rings as a movie, but you give us more than 2 or 3 chapters on the same person in the Bible, and we're like, for the love of God.
Well, Jacob's life could be made into like 3 different movies, probably. Anyway, so did you two want to talk about Rachel and Leah? Did you want to talk about Jacob wrestling with God? Did you want to talk about any other part of Jacob's life?
Yes.
Yeah. So after this, he resumes his journey. The next thing that kind of happens in the story is he's at the well. So he sees a well, he's there, and he encounters some men at the well, and they kind of introduce that Rachel's coming, and I think he falls immediately in love with Rachel. Isn't that kind of how it goes? And he goes up and removes the stone from the opening and waters the sheep.
He totally bros out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he shows off. He stands kind of funny with the stone, so his guns are showing.
But I kind of forgot that there was other people at the well. Maybe I was getting confused with another well story that
there are a lot of well stories.
That there were other shepherds there who actually did connect the dots for him that this was Laban's daughter. So he kind of knew that before. Yeah. It wasn't just a random beautiful woman, and he hoped that because he was in the right place that it was the relative.
Yeah, I think, and we've mentioned this a couple different times now, but just for those maybe who are just joining in on this podcast, and go back and listen to the Rebekah one and the first part on Jacob, is there's some interesting elements here of pointing towards some level of Herculean strength that Jacob has, because it's the whole part of the reason it introduces the other shepherds is to say they were waiting for everyone to get there so they could remove the stone.
Oh, yeah, right.
As if in some way the stone was too big, which would make sense because they would want to protect their well. And so the stone was too big for an individual to pick up. They had to wait for everyone to get there to move the stone. And just a few moments ago, Jacob used a stone that was big enough to be a pillar as his pillow. And so we just have all these elements, and we're going to see Jacob wrestle God in a few minutes. So again, we just have another element here of the Herculean strength. Now, whether this is meant to establish him as a Herculean character, or whether it's actually to show that he is strong, right? The same way that Rebekah was shown the same way, that Rebekah was strong and therefore was reliable, trustworthy, good. That tends to be some shortcuts literarily that are taken. So.
Or he was so in love that like the cartoon characters like grows
there you
twice
go.
his size and can move the stone.
Yes, there's that part. And then he said, "Waka waka waka." That wasn't a cartoon, was it? That was the Muppets.
Yeah.
Even my bad pop culture is bad.
So Rachel runs home to tell Laban what has happened. And like, what sticks out to you about the character of Laban? Because now we're delving into Laban land.
Well, the deception of like, psych, you don't get to be with Rachel. Here's my other daughter.
Like at moments he seems really like hospitable and welcoming and like happy, but then he's like deceptive at the same time and like maybe self-interested or...
It is kind of interesting though, like that Jacob put on all of Esau's stuff to fake it and get the blessing from Isaac, and then he gets fooled, thinks it's Rachel but it's Leah. Like, I don't know, karma.
Yeah, right.
Way to introduce karma into the Hebrew Bible. I think that there's a piece of this. I don't know that we always look at this fairly for Laban, right? Laban in some ways reminds me of that kid that all of his friends leave the small hometown and go off to the big city, and they're still at home and they're like, I can't get out of this place, right? It feels a little bit like that for Laban. You have like Rebekah goes off and joins into this Abrahamic family who is wealthy beyond imagination, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a piece that we often miss, just sheer wealth that Abraham had. And so here is Rebekah, who is now a part of that, who sends her son back to the small hometown to get a wife. Mm-hmm. And Laban is like...
Sounds like a Hallmark Christmas story.
My God.
Christmas movie.
Just add that to our list.
Christmas in the desert.
As long as it's not a Lifetime movie, we'll be
Hallmark.
I know, that's why I said as long as it's not a
life. Right.
Although this one kind of is.
Yeah, kind of.
This one is kind of with Leah and Rachel. So yeah, I do feel like Laban kind of gets a little bit of a bad rep. I mean, Laban definitely does manipulate the situation. But in the same sense, it was tradition that you married your oldest daughter off first, right? Like, because it was important. Because the older that a person got, the less likely they were to get a suitor. And so there is some of this that exists. And I realize we can feel uncomfortable about the whole arranged marriage thing. And I get that and the complications that exist there with our modern sensibilities. But there is a part of this that you're kind of like...
Yeah.
But there's totally that moment of like, once again, information that would have been useful to me yesterday.
Right. Yeah.
It is kind of interesting as you say like the tradition is to marry off the older daughter first. It's almost like that's the daughter's birthright.
Yes.
Yeah,
in some ways. Yeah, I think that's actually a really interesting perspective. Because one of the things, and we'll just make a quick note about this, because I think we actually did a decent chunk or talked about this in another podcast. If not, we will in a future one. Marriage in ancient times was not about love.
Right.
At its inception, right? But oftentimes after two people were put together, they would fall in love over time. It was an economic system. It was how you secured the safety of your family, the safety of your town, the safety of all these things. So it was an economic mechanism. And I think that oftentimes one of the biggest complications we have in relating to the Bible and the way that marriage is done is that we rarely today, though we would all still be able to list off a handful of people that we either personally know or have read in the tabloids, so to speak, of people that got married for economic purposes or for power purposes, right? So it still exists, but then that was the main point
Right.
of marriage. That is no longer necessary in our culture. And because of that, we have different expectations of what relationships and marriage looks like. And I think that it's helpful to understand, yes, it's still uncomfortable, it's still icky at moments, but it's helpful to understand that these moments were about economics, especially with Laban in this situation. It's 100% economics for Laban. He's going to get labor out of Jacob, and Jacob is really good at what he does, so he's also going to increase his flock and everything else with Jacob. So it's just important. I think it's an important note for us to take.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and if I am recalling this story properly, isn't it Leah has almost all the kids, and then Rachel is the mother of Joseph and Benjamin, I think. And so, but then it's like Joseph that goes on to be like the savior of Israel.
Yes.
Okay.
You are accurate.
Just
And there's a couple of other wives in there too.
Just putting my Joseph
Having
and the
kids.
Amazing Technicolor
Yeah.
Dreamcoat
Yeah.
knowledge to use.
And there's a mandrake or two that shows up.
Yeah.
The screaming ones?
That's what I always think of now. And I hate it. And now we've just introduced Harry Potter. Harry Potter, Karma, Jared Kushner, Lifetime. Yeah,
Hey,
it's,
spoilers.
You're welcome.
Spoilers. I've never seen Harry Potter, or read the books.
mandrakes are these plants that when you pull them out of the soil,
They scream and they can knock you out.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I believe it's a different, what is the term? Strain of mandrake than the one in the text. Yeah. It's a different strain.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway.
But yeah, between Leah and Rachel and Bilhah and Zilpah, he ends up with the 12.
Oh, right. I forgot about
The 12 sons.
Yeah. Gotcha.
But you're right, Rachel only had Benjamin and Joseph.
Joseph. Yep.
So lots of babies born, flocks multiplying.
All the babies.
Mm-hmm. And then he starts to get ready to leave, unless there's anything you want to...
I do just want to bring up again that one of the things we see is that it says, and Leah's eyes were weak.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
I remember you talking about this before.
And we often make that Leah was ugly.
Right.
Or unsightly. And I just do not think that there is enough here to make us believe that that's the case. If anything, I would argue it's associating her with Isaac, who we just learned a few chapters ago that in this age of his eyes were becoming weak.
Yeah.
And we already know that Abraham, when Abraham sent his servant, he forced Isaac to stay home. And we talked about this in the Rebekah recording, is that the servant went and found someone that was much more like Abraham than seemingly Isaac. Mm-hmm. And Rebekah reflects many more of the attributes of Abraham than Isaac does. And I would argue that in some way, the text is doing the same thing here, saying that Leah, whose eyes were weak, was much more like Isaac, and Rachel was much more like Rebekah.
Interesting.
And so that's at least my argument. I think it makes way more sense that they used. It's the first time we see the weak eyes is with Isaac, and then next thing we know, we're seeing it with Leah. So to me, the text wants to connect those two things.
Yeah.
Okay.
And actually, just glancing at this, in 30:25, after Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me on my way so that I can return to my homeland." So does that mean Benjamin was born later? I wonder where
Must have
Benjamin...
been.
I mean, it may not be that important, but I kind of thought all the kids just happened here and then he packed up and left.
No, I don't even know that Joseph met Benjamin before
I don't
he
think
was,
so. Yeah.
but that's a void in my memory.
Yeah.
I think,
Comment below.
yes.
When does Benjamin appear? in the
Comment
story?
below how bad Don is at the Bible.
Well, if you want to go according to the movie,
That's always a good idea.
He had no idea that Benjamin existed. But I actually think that's in the text somewhere when they're talking about the cup and the stolen cup. And
Okay.
he's like, there's no other son, But I could be getting the movie and the book mixed up. Book's much better than the movie.
I also want to point out to any of our listeners who are thinking about getting into animal husbandry that speckled sticks in front of your
right.
animals will not indeed make them spotted.
That's right. I forgot about that.
You can hang pictures on your wall of whatever you want, but the child you produce while consummation is happening in front of that image does not impact what kind of child you will have. So just a quick notation for anyone interested in animal husbandry that this is not accurate.
That's a good tip.
You're welcome. That's what I'm here for.
All right. So we don't have too much time left. So did you want to talk about Jacob wrestling with God for the last few minutes?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, there it is. In Genesis 32, starting at 22 to 32 for anybody who might be looking to find it later. So Jacob wrestles with a man. Well, thinks it's a man, right? Mm-hmm. And then the man couldn't win, so he...
So this is often the
touches
case in the
Jacob's
text, just so everyone understands. This is often the case in the text, is that someone will meet a man, have the interaction, and then as either the man departs or the interaction is ending, they will say, I came face to face with God.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that is a very common thing. It's just as common as brothers fighting and wanting to kill each other in the Bible. Like this whole moment where it starts out as a man and then maybe as an angel and then becomes God is very typical of the way that this kind of lore was told.
So here's my question about this part. So they're wrestling, Jacob's winning, man touches Jacob in the hip socket, so Jacob's hip is out of joint. And then, but Jacob still wouldn't let go. And he's like, I won't let you go until I get your blessing. So, but we just talked about God giving Jacob a blessing at Bethel. So what gives?
His hip.
Yeah. But seriously, like why ask for
But what's the
another blessing? You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed.
So do you imagine that this moment is significant to Jacob personally? Not for the story of Israel, because he's renamed Israel. But do you think that it's significant to Jacob to be renamed?
Well, Jacob means deceiver.
Oh, right. Supplanter.
And a lot has happened. And I feel like, we kind of jumped past 32 for the sake of time, but before he wrestles with God, he's preparing to meet Esau. He's sent a gift. He's sent all these things that to kind of like reconcile, replace everything that he took from Esau. He's aiming for reconciliation. So even in like the idea of that, like he's just scared about what's going to happen, and like wrestling with like what he needs to do, and like back to that idea of how does he bring heaven to earth in this situation, like and tormented on that, and wanting to change the story and be better. That's what I see happening here. And even when you read it and you said like he struggled with God and with men, and I don't really ever remember that being there until you just said that, but it just makes me think of like this same idea we're talking about with the ladder, like the physicality of this, that like it's a practicality that he is struggling, like maybe with his inner man, but also like the people in his life and how to interact with them, how to bring that heaven to earth. He struggled with men, he struggled with God, and he has prevailed. And God has looked favorably on like his change of heart as he tries to reconcile and, repay Esau for what he has taken from him by sending that gift ahead.
Yeah, I think you could make a case that this is, in some ways, when we read the road to Damascus with Paul, right, who is Saul, and has the conversion experience on that road and is renamed because of a change in what is the way that Saul was going about things versus the way Paul will go about things. I think that this renaming moment is extraordinarily significant. And that more than anything, this is what Jacob desires, is to leave behind the deceiver, the disruptor, and instead become Israel.
Yeah.
Who, instead of being the one who deceives, he's the one who strives and struggles with God and men. And I think I think it was an important moment for him to actually be healthy. I think about the trans community
exactly what was going through my mind.
In the moment where the individual takes on a new name, it gives them that opportunity to release some of the trauma and or baggage that existed with the prior name. And we see that in things outside of the trans community, just individuals who change their names at some point in their life because of trauma or because of needing to leave something behind. So I think this is a significant moment, maybe more so. This might be one of the more important renaming stories in all the Bible. Because if you think about Abram, it's just renamed Abraham, right. Sarai, Sarah, basically adding God to their name in a lot of ways, right? Where this is a completely renaming and recharacterizing.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I mean, even Paul and Saul are just...
they rhyme.
One letter. No, I was thinking the same thing and thinking, wow, there is actually like biblical precedent for a name change. And yeah. Any final thoughts?
I think Sarah still had more thoughts that weren't just final, right?
Oh, did I? I don't know. I do have an interesting note I wrote in my Bible. I have no idea when I wrote this, but it says that the word for wrestled, Jacob was left alone and a man wrestled, is Bak, B-A-Q. And then a few verses later in chapter 33, but Esau ran to meet him, hugged him, is Habak, H-A-B-A-Q. And it's a rhyme and a play on words, which is kind of interesting.
That's interesting.
Jacob got Bak. I really feel like I just want to apologize to the listeners of this episode and to Jacob. I also want to apologize to Jacob. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I do think that Esau's response to Jacob, where he falls on him and kisses his neck, and just, just this moment is so redemptive and beautiful. The sheer hatred that existed between these two, the competition from before birth, through the giving of the birthright. All of those things, that there's this unbelievably beautiful redemptive moment where fear gets exchanged for love and acceptance. And it's just so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for listening. If you're interested in learning more about the AJFF podcast, you can go to ajffpodcast.com. You can read all about the three of us, sign up for a newsletter, and find all of our social media links there. We would love to keep up with you in between episodes, so please check it all out. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.